Hi, my name's Jane and I'm a PhD researcher at the University of Portsmouth. Welcome to my paper today, The Royal Navy, British Culture, Propaganda and Opinion. During the Second World War, the mobilisation of the national consciousness towards fighting the war from the home front created a fine line between popular culture and propaganda. A supposedly subconscious approach to the dissemination of wartime propaganda capitalised on the fact that the Navy was especially ingrained within the identity of the nation and commanded a level of popular sentiment. The Ministry of Information and Admiralty regularly collaborated with and instructed creatives to produce work that not only satisfied a sense of recreation, but contained powerful propagandist messages which influenced public opinion and gained support for the Navy. This paper explores just a small selection of this cultural output, arguing that naval propaganda became enmeshed with popular culture to reinforce a sense of national identity, to proliferate a positive opinion of the Navy, and to fuel patriotism. Furthermore, far from being subconscious, audiences were highly aware of the purpose of this type of propaganda and were often accepting of it. The intersection between culture and naval propaganda has received very little attention, and it's important that historians begin to consider in much greater depth how the Navy had an ongoing influence in British culture and society. The cinema had gradually overtaken the music hall during the 1930s as the most popular form of mass entertainment. It's no wonder, therefore, that the Admiralty endorsed and contributed to several naval films, of which Paul Mackenzie suggests that 5 or 6 key films were symptomatic of the popular faith in the Navy. Therefore, this genre steeped in the ideologies of nationhood, patriotism, masculinity, and class, according to Mackenzie, readily exploited an already naval-minded nation. The Mass Observation Survey concluded in 1940 that film was an effective tool for propaganda for the fact it targeted a captive audience that were not prepared to resist its appeal. Despite the assumption that war films relied on an unsuspecting audience, cinema goers exercised autonomy in their viewing choices. Whatever the impetus to attending, the cinema experience was, after all, a diversion from the war. However, attendance at naval war films could also be perceived as a public display of support. Naval films were predominantly dramas, with a few notable exceptions, such as All at Sea, released in February 1940, starring comedian Sandy Powell, which was deemed by one audience member as good propaganda for the Navy. Similarly, Bell Bottom George, released in 1940, featured the much-loved George Formby as a hapless waiter who accidentally joins the Navy by borrowing a friend's uniform. Formby's unswerving tenacity and resolve, despite his lack of conventional masculinity or heroism, portrayed a man trying to fulfill his dream of joining the Navy, over which he triumphs when he thwarts a German spy ring, an allusion to the endurance and triumph of the Navy and the nation. George Formby's films such as Let George Do It were well received, and Formby's songs were perceived to have a powerful influence on audiences in stirring patriotic spirit, more so than leading politicians, according to one cinema goer. Conversely, several dramatic films received acclaim for their sobering and realistic portrayal of naval warfare, including Convoy, We Dive at Dawn, In Which We Serve, and Ships with Wings. These films were praised for their realism of depicting the war at sea, primarily because filmmakers spent time serving aboard the ships to capture footage and bring the soul of the Navy into cinemas. Even the so-called realistic film was greatly engineered to fulfill a patriotic rhetoric and subvert the possibility of defeat or cowardice. In reviewing the real scenes in Convoy, the sketch newspaper stated, "The terrific explosions on deck and amidships are exciting audiences already supremely Navy conscious, and with the Admiralty adding legitimacy and financial support to the production process, this caused significant public interest in the film." In Which We Serve tells the story of a destroyer which is dive-bombed, stranding the crew who await rescue. The film highlighted class differences between the sailors, but ultimately suggested the crew to be as one in the face of their sacrifice. Anthony Aldgate and Geoffrey Richards assert that the film captured the spirit of the British public during the war, with the ship itself as a metaphor for Britain. The sailors displayed the commitment, discipline, and dedication expected of the Navy, while showing the sisterhood of naval wives at home, symbolising the heroism and sacrifice embodied on the home front. The Monthly Film Bulletin of 1943 called it propaganda of the very best sort, showing the impact upon all classes of society and the depiction of civilian and naval lives as a distillation of national character. The film Ships with Wings, about the Fleet Air Arm, released in 1941, gained a good critical reception as it touched people's emotions immediately and effectively, rousing people for the moment to a high pitch of emotional enthusiasm about the Navy. The Mass Observation Survey cited its success owing to a distortion of reality in portraying an atmosphere of schoolboyish excitement, just as war was wished to be in the depths of the public consciousness. However, its distortion of reality and a preconceived notion of what naval life should be caused a supposed intellectual aftermath, where the audience questioned its disparaging depictions and its silly story. Alive to the fluctuations in opinion and the waning popularity of the war genre, towards the end of 1944, the Navy had itself largely stepped away from its involvement in film. The British public were becoming tired of being immersed in the atmosphere of war, and the naval films subsequently suffered. Despite the closure of many theatres and dance halls, live entertainment, including variety shows, were a popular escape from war, despite, as Richard Dove has suggested, theatre becoming increasingly conscripted to a patriotic narrative to ensure its contribution to the process of nation building. Music publishers Peter Morris Music Limited reported in November 1939 that the publishing of Ain't It Grand to Be in the Navy was with the full cooperation of the Admiralty, and its popular appeal achieved more than the men at the Ministry of Information in capturing the spirit of national morale. As such, certain songs featured heavily in most variety and musical productions. An investigation into the mobilisation of music encouraged government control of all music of doubtful national effort value, and as such, writers and theatrical directors were subsidised to produce output of defined patriotic character. One such writer being Jeffrey Wright, who joined the Navy whilst having 3 shows running in London. He was heralded as symbolic of the national character by training at sea all day, then retiring to a corner of the lower deck at night to resume writing new productions for those at home. A musical production called Up and Doing, which premiered at the Savile Theatre in London in April 1940, included performances of To the Sea and Ships and You Can't Beat the Lads in Navy Blue. A risque performance called Strip Please at the Brixton Empire in July 1940 swapped scenes of nudity for patriotic songs and dances, including a scene called Ships Ahoy, with the caption of Now There Is a Third War and Still the Spirit Lives On, above a lifeboat named HMS Cossack. One variety show was otherwise unaltered from before the war, but displayed a backcloth of the bridge of a ship, which led to the show's finale performance of Ain't It Grand to Be in the Navy, just tagged on to the end. It was estimated that 60% of touring reviews in 1940 had topical titles, justified by weaving naval symbols, red, white and blue costumes and existing naval songs into a production, of which the navies here and the fleets in port again were popular examples. Even traditional pantomimes were not immune from the imposition of naval propaganda. A production of Aladdin at the Golders Green Hippodrome included a departure from the story when the villain Ebenezer sang Wings Over the Navy before resuming his skirmish with Widow Twankey. An audience member noted the impact of one performance in July 1943 when the song The Sailor with the Navy Blue Eyes received the longest applause of the whole performance. Furthermore, managers of dance halls and clubs worked to include Navy-themed performances, especially involving serving sailors who had a flair for the theatrical. When a sailor was plucked from the crowd to croon a popular Navy song, the audience gave an ovation and applauded for 20 seconds. A patron of the Astoria did note the possibility that he had been placed in the audience by design to instigate such a patriotic reaction. Now, finally turning attention to wartime reading habits, The Second World War brought about a significant increase in the sale and purchase of non-fiction books, which explored the modern strategy of the Navy, naval history, and sailors' memoirs. Literature concerning the Navy explored themes of heroism, tradition, and the reliability of the Navy. Indeed, even an easy and entertaining analysis of the British Army, called Bless 'Em All in 1942, had an opening chapter titled "Thank God We've a Navy." In addition, short stories on a naval theme were printed in newspapers and magazines intended for casual consumption. Reading experienced an upward surge during the war years, owing to what Robert James has explored as a new tolerance towards light fiction and the provision of literature for escapism in public libraries. Indeed, one publication of short naval stories was labelled sensible reading because it was designed to bring distraction during sheltering hours and was widely available at booksellers. According to one library manager in his report to the mass observation in August 1943, although fiction was still the most popular, the phenomenon of borrowing non-fiction books on the war in immense and continued number excluded the new publication of books on most other topics. The reading of fiction and non-fiction literature, which often replaced other forms of leisure, could therefore be used to convey ideologies about the war and the role of the Navy, making the act of reading seem a patriotic contribution to the war effort. An article entitled "Bystander Bookshelf" suggested that reading about battles and exploring it to the full was a form of escapism, as it drew the reader's mind to something other than their own suffering. In June 1940, the Daily Sketch advertised the new book British Warships. This was a 40-page manual of the modern Royal Navy containing illustrations and ships' plans. Its publication by the London Illustrated News came with an endorsement from Neville Chamberlain, who was quoted, "The Navy is today, as it has always been in our history, the first line of defence of these islands and of that great empire which was built up by the toil and the enterprise of our fathers." Reading such factual volumes was an important tool in arming the population with the knowledge to really understand the role of the Navy and to feel a sense of contribution. In autumn 1941, the article "Defend Yourself" claimed that reading about the war and the Navy was the best weapon the civilian could have in fighting the enemy, stating, "From books alone can you grasp the scope and implications of the Nazi attack upon humanity. Books will tell you all that you hope to know of our Navy, Army, and Air Force." In contrast to these purely factual or instructional volumes, a great number of memoirs and accounts by naval officers provided markedly romanticised views of naval warfare, whilst claiming to provide realistic, authentic eyewitness accounts. Titles included Through the Dark Night by James Lonsdale Hodgson, Action Stations by Rear Admiral H.G. Thursfield, Stories of the Navy by Lieutenant Commander Thomas Woodruff, The Battle of the Atlantic by Frank H. Shaw, and Sea Power by T-124. The unusual name of the author in this example being the nom de plume of a writer who rejoined the Navy and was therefore debarred from using his real name. In each of these examples, the literary dialogue between author and reader was perceived as an exchange of privileged information, glimpsing into the life of the naval officer who provided an authentic tang of the sea. Literature about the Navy, of course, was not universally endorsed. One office clerk who preferred something escapist noted the office boy coming into work looking a bit stale, clutching a copy of Navy in Action, which evidently had overtaxed his energy. To conclude, this paper has explored naval propaganda within three of the dominant forms of popular culture in Britain during the Second World War. It's demonstrated how many naval references were woven into modes of popular entertainment, often instigated by government and Navy involvement in the creative process, to greatly influence the tone and content of film, live performance, and literary publications. Naval references were popular because of existing sentiment for the Navy, and moreover, the British public were not passive recipients of pervasive propaganda, but questioned its impact. Civilians were encouraged to read, attend cinema showings and performances, which included characterizations, visual symbols, patriotic language and themes, presenting the Navy as symbolic of national identity and a sense of Britishness that served to rouse patriotism and morale. Thank you for listening to my paper today. Please feel free to get in touch if you have any questions or suggestions regarding my research.